Alright, we are looking at our SBW 6.03 help video today. Now I'm just going to go ahead and get right into the mix here and get into some practice problems that can help you with your SBW. Starting with the actual SBW itself, we are looking at these two figures, excuse me, and we actually can see that they're trapezoids. However, the point here is that in the first problem, or part of the problem, it says name the side that is missing from the first proportion, and they actually give you the proportion that they are looking at. Okay, so your task is to identify that missing piece of the proportion for the first question. So make sure that your answer is involving a segment. Make sure that it's a segment. It's a missing side, so we want to list that out. Right? Now, if you want to list out a segment, as long as you have that written out, segment whatever, that's fine. Segment whatever the answer is, that's fine. But we're looking for that there. Then we're actually solving a proportion in the second part. Use a completed proportion to solve for x. Round to the 10th place, 1 decimal place after the point. We'll see if you are paying attention. You want to make sure that you do that for your second one. When I use the completed proportion to solve I, and then you answer what you end up getting. You're going to do the same thing we did on the first question. Again, here you're going to complete the proportion that is set up for you. So once again, we're missing a side length, and we have to identify what that is. Right, that's the third one. And then finally, the last one, you are solving your final proportion. Use the completed proportion to solve for y, meaning the proportion that you just set up, in other words, to solve for y. You're setting that up. So you're setting the proportion up first, and then you're going to solve, right? And you're going to round to the 10th place, again, to 1 decimal place. That's what we are expecting to see when you are completing the figure. Okay, so let's do some practicing here with that in mind. So here is a problem that we can practice together that has some snowmen here. Okay, now in this problem we are completing the proportion. Excuse me. So look at the setup. It's actually asking us to do the same thing that the first question and the second question are asking us to do. We have to set up our proportion and correctly identify. We have BU over ND. BU over ND. So they did, in this case, 3 over x, right? So they're going to do this length here divided by this length here. So if you look at the two figures, we want to write corresponding parts. So what corresponds with BU? That is going to be LE. LE in this case. This is the length. The missing side for the proportion is LE. You can either say LE, or you certainly can, if it's just naming a segment, you could technically do that if you wanted to. Okay, LE. However, the length is what we care about, right? Because that's what we want. So now that I know that, we have BU over ND. BU over ND, that is 3 over x. 3 over x, and that is going to equal 6 over 2. Now, you are cross multiplying. We talked about this technique, right? Cross multiply. There are other things you could do, but this technique is reliable because it's consistent. It always works when solving proportions. So when we cross multiply, we end up with 6 times x equal to 3 times 2 is 6. Then you're going to divide both sides by 6, and that gets us x equals 1. So this right here is the work you're kind of doing on the side to get your answer. Here's the second sentence. When I used the completed proportion to solve, I found that x equals 1. X equals 1. That's how I'm completing that entire part. That kind of represents almost 2 questions of the 4 as an example in your SBW. Here's another one. More snowmen. We have to love the cookies here that we have, the snowman cookies that we're baking. So we're looking at our snowmen here, and in that particular regard, we want to look at the proportion that is incomplete. We are missing this denominator. They are taking NT and they are dividing it by, well, let's pay attention to what they've done. They started over here with WI, and they are dividing that by its corresponding side ER, actually. They're dividing it by ER. So that means that we are pairing up with NT, in this case SM. So SM is going to be the missing side. Again, if it's just mentioning a side length, or just the side, it's SM with a 9 on segment straight edge on top. But if it's just SM, you can just say SM. It's missing SM down there, right? So now we can set up our proportion by plugging in everything into that proportion. WI was 2. We have that ER was 4, so 2 over 4. That's going to equal 1 over our variable y. Again, we're going to cross multiply using the cross multiplication technique. So this is where you're going to cross multiply, and we end up with, in this case, we've got 2y, and this is going to equal 4. And we're going to divide both sides by 2, and we end up with y is equal to 2. So when I used the completed proportion to solve, I found that y equals 2. There I go. Remember, I used cross multiplication, so we cross multiply in that particular step right there. Alright, let's try it again. Let's look at this one. We are looking at our incompleted proportion. We have this proportion right over here that is incomplete. They are comparing AS. AS is going to be right here. I'm going to use a different color actually because I already have orange over there. AS is being compared to MN. Okay, so they've gone ahead, and we know pH is in the denominator. That leaves you with the only other option available. We'll call that TO, and I'm not going to write the segment symbol on top because technically it's replacing this right here, and that's what we care about. So TO is 2. We have that over 7, and that's going to equal our value of x, which was AS. That's the one that's missing. And we have that over 14. Again, we're going to cross multiply here, cross multiply here. So there we end up with 7x is equal to 28. And then we will divide by 7 on both sides, and that is going to give us x equals 4. So when I use the completed proportion to solve, I found that x is equal to 4. X is equal to 4. That is what I found. Again, this step right here, cross multiply. That is the standard technique for solving a proportion that will definitely help you on your SBW, okay? So do not forget that. Alright, maybe one more example here. We have these other snowmen, and it looks like they've identified 3 segments. We've got ND. Again, ND is right here, and they are comparing that actually to its corresponding side on the other figure. So here we have CA, and we have to identify its corresponding side, which is going to be, in our case, we have YS, right? YS is right there. So again, we plug everything that we know about CA in. That's 2. YS is, of course, unknown, so it's given, or actually in this case, YS is 6. We do know what it is. It's 6 inches. What we don't know is ND. That's the variable Y, and we're dividing by 9. So again, we're going to cross multiply like so, cross multiply like so. There we get 6Y. Here we get 18, and we're going to divide by 6 on both sides. So we get Y is equal to 3. When I used the completed proportion to solve, I found that y equals 3. I'm finishing that sentence nice and succinct. And again, what did we do? We cross multiply in order to complete that very first initial step there of the work. Plugging all the values in, we get our value that we need when we cross multiply. And with that, you have your SBW. As I outlined before, you're going to set up the problem in the same way. You have incomplete proportions, complete those proportions, and then make sure, please make sure to use them to help you answer the second and the fourth questions that you are looking for, okay? And remember that the 3 examples that I went through outline exactly how you can do that. Now I have one final little suggestion that maybe you could take into consideration based off of the diagram that you currently are working with over here. Notice how one of the figures is actually inside of the other figure, right? So just a little suggestion, but I've drawn another pair of trapezoids, and I just give you a suggestion that maybe it might be a nice thing for you to take both figures and separate them. And then you can color code corresponding sides to help you correctly set up your proportions. This is just a suggestion for your SBW, but maybe taking a look at your SBW, you could do the same thing, and it might make setting proportions up a little bit easier for you. This is going to be your 6.03 SBW Help video.